It's a very strange act of masochism, really, and an act of masochism carried out by people who don't seem to know anything. Today, there is slavery across Africa today. In fact, there are more slaves in the world today than there were at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. So some of us are simply a bit bored of hearing people ripping at closed wounds and then crying about their hurt, or their presumed hurt. And you could do this to everyone and to everything, but most civilizations and cultures don't behave like this because most of them aren't just masochistic and so self-hating.
I am so sorry that Douglas is bored by the pain that has come.
This might be one of the most brutal Douglas Murray takedowns I've ever seen in my life. I am not kidding. This woke activist thought she had a point about Black history, but Douglas just took everything she said and blew it all in her face. It was brutal to watch. She had absolutely nothing to say in return. This all started when some woke activists started complaining about people celebrating the 4th of July, which represents Independence Day for America. Let's get into it.
Veteran Congresswoman Maxine Waters in 2021 claimed the Declaration of Independence wasn't for equality and it was only for white men. Her comments were echoed by her fellow Democrat Cori Bush, who said black people still aren't free. So is there something in all this? Should these national institutions and occasions be opportunities for reflection and apology rather than celebration? Well, joining me now is best-selling author of The War on the West and conservative commentator Douglas Murray, country music legend Lee Greenwood, and my Talk TV contributor Paula Rowan-Adrian, and Talk TV presenter Richard Tice. All right, well,
it's time for the savagery to begin.
It's all right. Well, a stellar panel. Douglas, let me start with you. You read a great piece this week for The Telegraph about this weird trend. I agree with you. I think it's weird, where we're being compelled to just apologise constantly for everything that happened in the past. Why are we doing this?
That's right. It's a very strange act of masochism, really, and an act of masochism carried out by people who don't seem to know anything.
Couldn't have said it better than this.
I mean, people talk about the British monarchy having to apologise for slavery. It was King George III who signed the Anti-Slavery Act into law in 1807. Prince Albert gave one of the most extraordinary anti-slavery addresses when the British were still policing the anti-slave trade on the high seas in 1840 to the Anti-Slavery League in London. All of this was addressed 200 years ago. And today, unfortunately, there's a kind of new type of malcontent, and usually also a huckster to boot, who just decides that none of this happened. Usually it's because they don't know it happened. And as a result, they look at our history and everything in our country, right up to just, innocent pastimes like cricket, and they decide to name everything as guilty. And, you could do this to everyone and to everything, but most civilizations and cultures don't behave like this because most of them aren't just masochistic and so self-hating.
I want to remind everybody that from the 16th to the 19th century, over 12 million slaves have been sold from Africa to America. And the vast majority of those sellers were black people themselves that also had their own personal slaves. So, if you are so keen on looking at the roots and cause of slavery, then you need to sort it out with your own race that literally facilitated these acts for profit.
All right. Paula,
Good evening.
your response to that?
I actually agree with Douglas about the fact that we don't know enough. He's absolutely right. We don't know enough, and it's important that we do. But part of the knowledge is also understanding the hurt and pain that were caused, not just about the good things. It's not just about the cherry picking. And wrongs are not about being masochistic. Saying sorry is not a bad thing. Saying sorry is actually a very empowering thing to do.
Why does it matter that a bunch of royals now get forced into issuing grovelling apology? Who cares? How does it change anything? It doesn't do anything, in my estimation, to impact on current slavery, where it exists around the world. It doesn't really make any difference to institutional racism, as we've seen in certain parts of society. I don't know what difference it makes. It might make people feel a bit better to see a royal grovelling, but so what?
She completely ignored Douglas's most important points, and she said that he was cherry-picking when he just wanted to present the other side of history. She didn't, because she was actually the one cherry-picking This woman,
See, I don't agree with you, surprise, surprise. I do think it makes a difference. I do think it makes a difference that people in power are heard to acknowledge pain and hurt. I do think it's important that people in power have taken the time.
But whose pain and hurt are you talking about? It's not people living today. These are going back hundreds of years in some cases, these crimes of slavery and so on. We all agree it was outrageous. It's been debated, really year after year after year. We all know this. I don't think that people have a lack of knowledge. And I'm not quite sure where the apology tour ends. What's the end game here?
So the end game is about the ability to understand the true history, not just the part of history that we have been taught. And that is the difficulty. So you're talking about who's the apology for. Well, the apology is for me. The apology is for those who have suffered. The apology is for those who continue to struggle through colonialism and through slavery. And I do think that it's important that royalty are coming forward and saying, we apologise for...
Okay, that was bland. Douglas has pointed out how white people did more good to black folks than they did to themselves, and she just ignored it. Now get ready for the most brutal verbal smackdown you've seen in ages. Douglas is about to unleash.
Douglas, the problem is we've forgotten how to be genuinely proud of our great countries, both America and the United Kingdom, two of the greatest countries in the world. It's almost like every day now, somebody somewhere, normally on the left, the woke left, is queuing up to find a reason to hate the countries and their histories.
This is just the beginning of what Piers had to say. Now watch what Douglas says next.
Well, it's a kind of grievance competition. Your guest earlier just tried to engage in it. I don't know what hurt she believes she's had from slavery. All of this was addressed 2 centuries ago. Everything has consequences. All history has consequences and ramifications. But, if we were to play this fairly, we would at least look at all of the countries around the world that engaged in the slave trade who are simply not interested in any form of reparations. The Ottoman Empire, all the Arab countries who not just traded far more slaves than across the Atlantic, but castrated all the men so that there wouldn't be any more African slaves after them. They worked them to the bone. I see no interest across Africa in paying reparations for selling their brother and sister Africans into slavery or for working them to the bone to the present day. There is slavery across Africa today. In fact, there are more slaves in the world today than there were at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. So some of us are simply a bit bored of hearing people ripping at closed wounds and then crying about their hurt.
Wait, he's not finished yet.
Or their presumed hurt. Because everybody could do this. 1 million Europeans were stolen by North Africans over the course of decades of the North African Barbary pirate slave trade. Where would you end if you did that? The answer is you couldn't end, because nobody is alive who has actually suffered the hurt, and nobody is alive who did the wrong. And I'd make one other point, if I may. It's always the countries that people want to come to who are put through this struggle session. Britain, like America and France, are the most desired destinations for migrants worldwide and have been for centuries. Why is that? It's not because we're racist, it's because we're better. It's because we're good. It's because when we see racism, we actually call it out and recognize it as a sin. Try finding that across Africa. Try finding that across the Middle East or in China. Nobody would hear.
This is what happens when you pass around new ideas without deeply thinking about the logic behind them. And just like Douglas said, due to how good the conditions in the UK are, it started to see a spike in net migration that reached an alarming rate of 606,000 in 2022. Also, polls show that a third of sub-Saharan Africa wants to move to another country. Can you imagine what Europe would look like if a third of Africa came here?
So what we have is a situation where the more virtuous countries are presented as the worst countries. It's sick, and most of us are tired of it.
Thank you, Douglas.
I am so sorry that Douglas is bored by the pain that has come from
That's not what he said.
Through slavery.
He didn't say. He didn't say. But what you're doing there, what you're doing. Yeah, but hang on, Paula. Paula, you're being very disingenuous. That's not what he said.
I am.
And viewers aren't stupid. They know exactly what he said. He's not saying he's bored by the pain. He's saying, and I think it's a perfectly valid point, the pain that people who are alive today are claiming they're suffering for what happened 200 or 300 years, it's not a real pain. They're not the ones who suffered what was going on 200 or 300 years ago.
So in terms of justice for all, I mean, I think we'd all agree that there
Well,
should
I'm
be
not
justice.
suffering from when the Normans
I think
invaded
we'd
this
all
country.
agree.
I'm not suffering from what my ancestors went through.
It's so easy to ignore the strongest points your opponent made and to just blanket everything with a stupid response. Just look at the stupidity of this cult and how far they are taking things based on faulty logic. A little kid has been chained in a roleplay because of what happened in history. Now let's listen to how she will try to come back from that.
I noticed that I'm not being allowed to respond.
Or from the Romans. In other words, where do you take this? I mean, should I now be feeling pain from what the Romans did to this country?
In terms of slavery, I can take it to 2015 when the slave owners were compensated by the government. So I can take it to that extent.
Where does your personal pain come?
And I can say to you, that I don't think that apologising is a bad thing. I think that apologising for a wrong is a good thing. I think that the Dutch royal family have done a fantastic thing in acknowledging what has gone wrong.
Okay, I hear you, but
I
honestly think it'll make no difference at all.
But do you owe white people an apology for all the bad stuff your race has done to us in history? Why does she feel like bad things happening to her race should be treated in a way higher regard compared to others? That sounds pretty racist to me. And just like Douglas said, there are more slaves today in Africa than there were at the height of the Atlantic slave trade, with more than 9 million black slaves. What does she have to say about this? And make another point about this.
That royalty are coming forward and saying, we apologise for the part that we played.
All right, so is that it? Is that enough? When is enough enough? If we all say sorry today... Hang on.
The British government, when is enough enough? To repay, to compensate slave owners.
So if we all say sorry today...
enough?
Well, that's my question to you, and you're not answering it.
My point is,
if we all say sorry today, it was terrible, which we all know.
Yeah.
Can we then say, right, that's done, we're going to look forwards, we're going to be positive, we're going to celebrate our achievements, learn from our failures, and we're done with apologising?
Absolutely. And so how are we going to learn from our failures if we do not understand what we did wrong?
You learn from your failures because that's what we're doing at the moment. The sort of report you had from the...
How do you learn from your failures if you don't know what you did wrong? If you refuse to accept that you did wrong?
Because the cricket board, the ECB, they've just produced a report. They reported. Some of it was good. Some of it you can criticise or question. The point is, we've learned from that. We're moving on. We're celebrating. We're being positive. Otherwise,
how have we learned? I tell you what it does.
It depresses everybody.
Everything needs to be so politically correct nowadays. It reminds me of that one clip of the Argentinian politician that just lost it over this. Take a look at this.
¿En qué locura estamos viviendo? La locura de la corrección política estúpida, donde básicamente, no, si ustedes no recitan el socialismo cool, si ustedes no son woke, entonces son violentos, son un peligro para la democracia. Vamos, muchachos.
Seguro.
Sigamos con estas estupideces y en lugar de ser 140, vamos a hacer la Villa Miseria más grande del mundo.
I think this little kid has also had enough of racism being shoved down his throat.
Or baseball.
Baseball.
Baseball over Black History Month?
Baseball.
Why are you choosing that? What about black people?
Because I don't like black people.
Look at the expression of that guy. He got so offended by it. Chill out, dude. He is just a child. Okay, now let's watch one more takedown of the woke activist by another guy on the panel before closing this off.
Country music performer, but I was born in California, spent 20 years in Nevada. I live in the South now, and I wrote this song because it was for unity. It's a unity and for military sacrifice. And yeah, America started as an interesting expedition and then an experiment, and we fought it out. We fought each other in the Civil War and said, okay, we're going to bury the hatchet here. The trouble is, as we move forward, a lot of people try to change history. I'm okay with history. I'm okay with apologizing for what happened back then. But I agree with you. That was back then. Let's move forward. Let's move on past that, and let's not change history and try to change what happened.
And with that, everything that needed to be said has been noted. The left seriously needs to show more gratitude towards the people they love complaining so much about. If you loved this video and you want to see more of Douglas destroying woke culture, then you can click on the video on screen and you'll be welcomed by a 27-minute compilation of him doing exactly that. We'll be waiting for you in the next one.